Hello and welcome. I am Stephanie Nicholls, the Training Manager for Michigan Alliance for Families, and we are going to be talking about the present level of academic achievement and functional performance today, this first big part of the IEP. This is one video in a series from Michigan Alliance for Families, and I encourage you to check out goals, objectives, and progress monitoring and accommodations, modifications, and services as well. Today, I'm glad you're tuning in for more information on the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. Michigan Alliance for Families provides totally free parent training and information to families across the state who have students that are currently eligible or might be eligible to receive special education supports and services. Our goal is to improve educational services and outcomes for students with disabilities. We try to reach families in a variety of different ways. You already know we have these recorded videos or webinars. You may want to check out other videos or webinars on that list as well. I'm glad you found us. I'm glad you're here. Our website, MichiganAllianceForFamilies.org, has lots of information. We tried to make that really easy to navigate. And we also have that search bar at the top. So if there's something specific you're looking for, feel free to use that. In addition to those resources that are available at your fingertips all the time, we also have regional parent mentors all throughout the state. And they all live where they serve. And they all have a loved one that currently receives or previously received special education supports and services. So these are concepts that they've lived in addition to the concepts that they have a lot of information about. So they are fantastic resources and are there to answer your specific questions. Do not hesitate to reach out to them. You can reach them through the 800 number, 800-552-4821, or again, like I said, you can find them on the website. Let's just take a quick moment and talk about what we're going to talk about today. So the quick snapshot is we're going to talk about IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and how that defines the Individualized Education Program, which includes the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. And that's where we're going to keep most of our focus today, is on that PLAAFP statement, what should be there, what it is, and kind of framing your thinking about how to approach it and what's important within it. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is a law that makes available a free and appropriate public education to eligible children with disabilities throughout the nation and ensures special education and related services to those children. This is the big federal law. This is required in every state of the union. States can have more than what's required by IDEA, but they can't do less. So in Michigan, we also have the Michigan Administrative Rules for Special Education. And they can do more than what's in the federal law. For example, the federal law covers from ages 3 to 21. And in Michigan, the Michigan Administrative Rules for Special Education actually covers from birth to 26, depending on the individual student's needs. So each state can do more and has some power over what some things look like, but the federal law is required. So this is not wishful thinking. This is not, oh, if only we could. This is actually what's required by federal law. Congress reauthorized IDEA in 2004 and most recently amended IDEA through Public Law 114-95, the Every Student Succeeds Act, in December of 2015. In the law, Congress states the disability is a natural part of the human experience and in no way diminishes the right of individuals to participate in or contribute to society. Improving educational results for children with disabilities is an essential element of our national policy of ensuring equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency for individuals with disabilities. This is the big federal law that should be framing our thinking when we're thinking about our kids. You can maybe in kindergarten right now, they may be in 4th grade right now, they may be in 9th grade right now. We want to be thinking long term about ensuring equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency for individuals with disability. The goal of education is to prepare our young people for their futures. That is not any different if students also receive special education supports and services. The goal is to prepare our young people for their futures, and this law ensures equality of opportunity. So as families, how we see IDEA in action most often is through the Individualized Education Program. That is how eligible children with disabilities who are entitled to a free and appropriate public education receive their free and appropriate public education that they the IEP is the primary vehicle to provide an appropriately developed program based on the individual needs of the child. I want to take a couple minutes and just talk about needs. When you're thinking about what you want to have in your IEP, I think the best starting point for your team to be able to work together is to really define what the students' needs are. When you're looking at the current picture and you're trying to capture where you want to be headed or what supports are needed, when we're looking at that PLAAFP statement, we want to be talking about needs. That driving the entire program should be the individual needs of your student. We know the IEP is intended to meet individual student needs. We've established that. So what does the IEP cover? I think as parents, we always think of this academic area, that the IEP supports the student for reading and writing and math and social studies and science. And this is a huge chunk of the IEP. It also includes all of those elective courses, that there are defined curriculums for PE and music and art and computer science and health and world language. Those are areas that absolutely are part of this academic piece. In Michigan, we have one curriculum that is laid out, the scope and sequence are defined. It's something you could Google, Michigan academic standards, and at least on my Google search, that first Michigan Department of Education link gives you access to all of these. We also share it on our Michigan Alliance for Families website. That can really be helpful in framing your thinking about what the grade level standard is, what participation looks like, what access looks like, how that academic piece is tied in, and if there are questions or concerns or issues or needs in those areas. So those guides for the scope and sequence of learning from the state of Michigan can be great conversation starters for the team. This is a huge chunk. This is the one we always focus on though, and there's more to what needs to be in the IEP than just the academics. We want to think about non-academic. We want to think about transportation, passing time, recess, lunch. Your student may be getting great grades and have a lot of academic success, but struggling with behavior issues in those less structured times. And the individualized education program can support all of those areas. It is not limited to in the classroom during the academic time. Those non-academic times, field trips are huge. What do those look like? What does the support need to be? How do we make sure that's included in the program that's meeting your child's individual education needs? The other piece included is extracurriculars. And sometimes when I say that, I have parents say, oh, that means my kid can automatically be on the football team. Is that what you're saying? No, that is not what I'm saying. I'm sorry. It means that your kid will have the same opportunity to be on the football team. So if they need supports and services to go with them to tryouts for football, those need to be available to them. That can be a part of the individualized education program. If everyone in the school is welcome on the swim team, supports and services go with your student to the swim team. If everyone in the school is welcome on the chess club, supports and services that are needed would go with them to the chess club. Those are only going to be for opportunities from the school. Those are not for private groups that rent a room in the school. There's some gray areas in those pieces, like Girl Scouts often rent a room to have their meeting at the school after school. That's not a school activity, so that would not be included in the IEP. But again, chess club would be included if that's a school-sponsored activity. So these are the three big areas the IEP covers: academic, non-academic, and extracurricular. And when you're thinking about your student needs, you want to think about all of these areas and then capture what needs could be addressed, what needs need attention or we need to think about for the individualized education plan. So we've talked about what IDEA is. We've talked about that it defines what the IEP is. Now I want to take it down to the level of what we're talking about today, which is the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. So the IEP has to take into account a child's present level of academic achievement and functional performance and the impact of that child's disability on his or her involvement and progress in the general education curriculum. So the present level has to look at the student's involvement and progress in the general education curriculum. The other piece I think is super important for everyone to know is that the school must place students in the least restrictive environment, LRE. And that means that the student is placed in general education to the greatest extent possible with supports and services. That's a decision made by the IEP team, which again, you are a part of. You are a member of that team. So I think it's important to think about what that least restrictive environment is. It's your neighborhood school, it's the classroom they would be in if they didn't have a disability, and that all students are general education students first with supports and services. So when we're thinking about present level, we want to be thinking about how your student is involved in making progress in that least restrictive environment. I hope that gives us a good understanding of where this is coming from. That IDEA defines that each student's unique needs are met by an individualized education program, and within that individualized education program, there needs to be a present level of academic achievement and functional performance captured. So now that we know that where it's coming from, let's dive into what the PLAFF is. To start talking about our PLAFF, I think we need to break down this weird alphabet soup. This one I think is an extra strange one. Sometimes it is just called the present level, sometimes it's called the PLAFF, but the PLAFF statement is intended to give you a snapshot of the student at a particular time and place. That is what the present level is, that we need to know where the student is at to plan for where they're going to go. We need to know what skills they have to figure out what skills are next. Basically, the PLAFF is the foundation of the IEP, that each area of need is identified in the PLAFF so that it can be addressed later in the IEP through the BEST tool. Really, this picture should provide enough information of the present level of right now that a stranger would be able to pick up the IEP and understand where the student is at. They should be able to understand where they're at in academic achievement, and that's what we were talking about a little bit in what the IEP covers. So these are the subjects that the child studies in school and the skills the student is expected to master. So this is reading and writing and math and science and PE and foreign language and all of that Michigan curriculum that we were talking about earlier is that academic achievement piece. We also want to talk about functional performance. And this covers the skills or activities that are not considered academic. They could include dressing, eating, personal care, social skills, behavior skills, how the student gets around the school, sensory needs, all sorts of different areas throughout the day. And this is going to look at some of those pieces that we talked about before in the non-academic areas as well. So what lunch looks like or what supports are needed. We really want to look at that whole picture. We want to look at right now in academics and functional throughout the day. Now that we have an idea of what the PLAFF is, what areas do we need to consider? What needs to be a part of that? These are areas that could be considered. All students do not need present level information in all of these areas. If your student has an IEP for a specific learning disability in reading, they may not have any independent living skill needs that need to be documented in the present level. These are areas that can be considered depending on the individual student need. All students, all IEPs should include parent input. That is a part of the present level. I encourage you to write out your parent input from a voice and thinking of what your students' needs are, and then collaborate with the team about how those can be addressed. I personally like to share my parent input in writing prior to the meeting because I like everyone to come to the table ready to collaborate and knowing what the key things are that we need to be thinking about. I don't want to throw any curveballs. I don't want any curveballs thrown at me. So I like to share my input prior to the meeting and share it in writing so I make sure that it's capturing my voice accurately. These other areas, academic and pre-academic, is going to be grades, testing, skills. It really is going to be, it should be individualized to your child. If your child struggles with behavior and emotional regulation and control and does great academically, has great grades, but needs other supports, there may not be anything documented in this area because there may not be any needs in this area. General education curriculum is going to look at the students' engagement and participation in the general education classroom. If the student spends all day on grade level content in general education and is successful and doesn't need additional supports, this may be blank. If the student spends all day in the general education classroom and has good grades and needs additional supports, maybe they're in a 5th grade classroom and reading at a 3rd grade reading level, and they have a need for auditory supports for the content to be read aloud if it's above the 3rd grade reading level. And with hearing the content, they're able to meaningfully participate. That is what their need is, to participate in the general education curriculum. Looking at secondary transitions, this is required at age 16, often incorporated closer to age 14, where we're starting to think about that transition to adulthood. Communication, speech, and language needs. Social, emotional, behavioral needs. This is where you're typically going to see, if you have a behavior intervention plan, it will be referenced here. And what information needs to be shared across the team needs to be referenced here. So if there are pieces of need for your student, if we are seeing needs in these areas, we want to have that documented in the IEP. You don't want to just talk to the social worker about it and assume it's taken care of. You want to make sure that it's in the plan. Motor and mobility may look like how the student gets around the school. It may look at sensory needs. Independent living skills are often going to look at those functional pieces. What supports are needed throughout the day? What adaptive skills do we still need support with? And then the medical section is the only area, honestly, of the IEP where I would want to see a diagnosis or even really the eligibility category. That when we're talking about the needs, we want to talk about what it looks like, not necessarily what it's called. So I could say in any of these areas, student has autism and needs autism supports. And that would not really provide me a lot of information about anything. That I don't know what that looks like, and I don't know what supports the individual student needs. So the medical diagnosis or the eligibility category shouldn't really be shaping what the present level contains. The individual student needs are what we want to see captured in these areas. Medical should include the diagnosis. It should include what medical supports are needed. It should include prescription information or nurse support or what that medical information is. That is where you do want to see it. But if I'm talking about communication, speech, and language, I want to know more about the student than what their diagnosis is. I want to know what the skills are. I want concrete examples of what that looks like in the classroom. I don't want to know what the label is. That doesn't help me. So what do we need to capture in these areas? What do we want to have documented in the present level of academic achievement and functional performance? Any needs that should be addressed in the IEP need to be captured in the PLAFF. So to start with, we want strengths and weaknesses. And we want this to be in the instructional settings. I once read an IEP that described the student's strengths as, "The child is a joy to have in class. His smile lights up the room and he loves pizza." That's great and that's nice, and I'm glad they like him and that he's fun and that he is a joy to have in class, but this doesn't give me any information about his strengths or weaknesses in the instructional setting. I think that the IEP itself is deficit driven. It looks at what the student can't do. I think it's really important that the team spend some time capturing what the student can do and what the strengths are. And that may be what the interests are, what the student is passionate about. Those are things that are motivating to the student, things that they're successful at. But we want to look at those in terms of the instructional setting. We also want to talk about what helps your child learn. Is that sitting near the instruction? Is that having visual supports to go along with verbal directions? There's 100,000 million different things that could help a student learn. We want to look at this individualized to your student and also what limits or interferes with the learning. Is the student easily distracted by music or talking? If the student sits near the door or window, do they have difficulty staying engaged? Are they unable to handwrite notes at the pace that the teacher keeps in the classroom? All of these things are things that work or don't work or help or don't help that have been tried already that we want to have documented in the present level so we don't continually spin our wheels and try the same things again. If we already know something doesn't help or something interferes, we don't want the one teacher to know that we need noise canceling headphones if there's going to be music in the school if we're going to an assembly. We want that in the plan so if that teacher changes for some reason, the person that takes over can pick up where is needed. That it's in the individualized plan, it's in that program so that it's carrying over with the student and part of what they need. So capturing that in the present level is where we need to start having it documented. We also need specific, measurable, objective data that captures what it looks like right now. We want this discussion to be data-driven. Can you show me the data for that? How old is the data? I mean, kids change fast, so if we're looking at data that's more than a year old, we probably need to look at something more current or get something more current to get that perspective. And that may not be another formal evaluation. There's all sorts of different data sources that can provide us insight as to what our present level looks like right now. But we want to have that measured specific data so that we can see progress over time. So that we can talk about where we were last year versus this year, where we were 6 months ago versus now. But we need that objective data to be able to do that. The last point here is how your child's disability impacts progress or ability to be involved in the general education curriculum. And defining the medical or educational label isn't really what we're talking about here. That doesn't need to be referenced in how the disability impacts progress. We want concrete examples. What does that look like? Are they unable to sit still? Do they need additional processing time? Do they have behavior challenges in the classroom? And what are those behavior challenges? What does it look like? Do they get overwhelmed where we need sensory breaks? What sensory breaks have been utilized? Did it help or interfere with learning? Does the student need access to technology to be able to participate? If the student has a motor planning delay that interferes with their ability to learn because they can't take notes at pace with the teacher, that is the disability impacting their involvement in the general education curriculum. So is technology needed, or has technology been tried for that student to be able to stay engaged and participate? We really want to capture what the impact of the disability is, not what the label of the disability is. So with all of this, we want to build a solid picture of right now so that that can help the team figure out the goals, where the student's headed, and what supports or services they need. Data can come from a variety of areas. There's a lot of different sources for data. These are some of the examples, and it is going to be like testing, a review of existing educational data, grades, behavior discipline records, what the teacher sees, what the social worker sees, what you see, what work looks like, teacher or parent questionnaires. A lot of parents, this is a huge sticking point of confusion of what the evaluation data should look like and how it's measured. Maybe your team decided to do the XYZ ABC test and you don't know why. And that is a great question to ask your team. That they should explain any data, and it should be written in common language that makes sense. They should also explain why they chose the evaluation method or the data source that they chose. So if you don't know what the Peabody scale is, that's something to ask your team. You can definitely Google specific assessments to see what the function of that assessment is, but I would talk with your team about why that tool was used and what information they were hoping to get from the tool. If there was a need they were looking at, if there was a specific area that they were focusing in on. When I was preparing to talk about this today, I looked up the most common occupational therapy assessments. And just to give you an example, there are 20 assessment tools listed for the most common occupational therapy. And then think about all of the different areas of the student could have need. There are lots and lots of evaluation tools out there, and they can all be great data sources, but you want to make sure you know what they are. If it doesn't make sense, ask. Why did we choose that tool? What were we looking at? And get that clarification. You should understand, and it should be written in a way that makes sense for why the data is there and why it is relevant to our students' needs. If there are areas of need that are not addressed by the current data picture, you want to talk with the team about how you capture that. One of the important things about data that we'll talk about in other webinars as well is having measurable data allows you to see progress over time. That if we have an opinion, if we have a struggles with communication and not data of what that looks like specific data could be from observations that the student uses 1 to 2 word utterances 50% of the time. That is a very different statement than struggles with communication. I can look in the future. I can't look in the future, that's a lie. But in the future, we can look back and see if we're still at the same spot compared to 1 to 2 word utterances 50% of the time. Next year, we may still struggle with communication, but we may be using 5-word sentences. And we can see that progress, but we need to have that measurable data to be able to see that. We'll talk about more in goals and progress monitoring. If you want to dive into that topic, I recommend that webinar over there. I really think sharing data throughout the IEP team and coming from a collaborative approach with the IEP team is helpful going into the IEP meeting. I encourage you to ask for a draft to review prior to the meeting. There is no requirement that the school provide a draft, and typically if they are going to be able to provide a draft, it's going to be a couple of days before the meeting. This is not going to be a 2 weeks prior to the meeting you want to review it. That's just not going to happen. The timeline is going to be a few days, and it is often a possibility, but the answer is always no unless you ask. So you might as well ask and see if that's something that's possible to be able to make sure, again, that everybody's starting from the same page, the same frame of thinking. Reading evaluations prior to the meeting also provides the same perspective, that if you have reviewed the current information that's in the read, the review of existing evaluation data, or if there's new data, asking for those evaluations prior, and if you have questions about those, make a list of those questions and share them with the person that provided the data, or you can talk about those with the team at the meeting. If you can get some clarification questions answered on the side prior to the meeting, that can allow the team to stay focused on the bigger IEP picture. So sometimes that's beneficial. If you have outside data that you want to have considered, you want to share that with the rest of the team prior to the meeting. Just like it would be preferred for you to review the draft from the school prior, if you want outside data considered, it's helpful for the rest of the team to be able to review that data prior. So if you're working with a private speech language pathologist or an ABA provider and there is information that you think is relevant to the individualized education program that makes sense for what your students' needs are, absolutely share that information. If you have been virtual learning at home and have noticed trends and have data from home, absolutely share that information. Even if it is little things like you get the draft and you see that there are these issues with transitions throughout the school day, that we're continually seeing behavior issues at transition times. And you know at home that if you say it's time to go, you're going to have an issue at home. But if you say we're leaving in 10 minutes, you need to turn everything off and start getting ready in 5 minutes. And then in 5 minutes, you point at your wrist like it's a watch and point towards the front door and your kid will start getting ready. You can share that data with your team that can give them success at school as well. Knowing what to expect and having that warning makes a difference. That's something you can share in the meeting or prior to the meeting. But if you have those formal data sources from outside sources, I would definitely share those prior to the meeting. I know I already said it, and I'm going to say it one more time, share a list of your child's needs with the rest of the IEP team prior to the meeting. Even if it's a bulleted list, even if it's not your prepared parent statement, what the priorities are for your students' needs from your perspective, need to be considered while they're formulating their plan as well, so that when you guys come together as a team to discuss the full plan as a team, everyone is considering those other perspectives. That what you see as your child's needs may be different than what the general education teacher sees as the needs or the special education teacher sees as the needs. And the great thing about the IEP team is that all these experts about your kid are coming together to build an individualized education program for your kid. So having all of those needs perspectives shared prior to coming together is really very beneficial. This is our IEP arrow sheet. It is meant to just help you understand how the pieces work together and take you through the IEP process. I mean, the goal of the IEP process is to provide a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment for students' success in the future. Okay, so we start with that present level of academic achievement where we're looking at the students' needs. We're looking at their strengths and what helps with learning, challenges, what interferes with learning, objective data, the general education curriculum, extracurricular, and non-academic. In all those areas, we're going to have all of that in this present level statement. From this foundation that we're building in the present level, we're going to be able to move that forward to look at the skills or behavior the child will learn. And then what adjustments need to be made to assure access to the general education curriculum. From there, we can talk about services, programs, and placement. We really need to start with that great picture of the student's needs and that accurate picture of right now in order for the rest of these pieces to be valuable moving forward. And together, all of that will bring us to offering a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment, individualized to your student. Questions to consider when you're developing the PLAAFP, before it's finalized. We want to really think about if it provides a snapshot of the student. Does it address all the areas of need? Is it written in terms that are understandable, specific, measurable, and objective? Does it describe how the student's disability affects the child's performance in the general education curriculum? And would a stranger be able to walk into the classroom and begin instruction or intervention? The idea of the present level is to capture right now so that anyone who's reading the document would be able to understand where your student is at, what their needs are, and be able to formulate a plan from there. That the present level is the foundation of the other pieces. That you can't start with the goals because you don't know where you're starting from. You can't start with the accommodations and modifications because you don't know what the impact is or what the needs are, what hurdles are out there. We have to start with a current picture of right now, and it should be written so that a stranger could step in and begin instruction or intervention. Woohoo! Way to go! We did it! You now know more about the present level of academic achievement and functional performance than you did 30 minutes ago. I hope this information was useful. I'm glad you took the opportunity to check it out. Please, I encourage you to connect with your regional parent mentor for more information and answers to your specific questions. On our website, you will find a map of the state that can connect you with their direct dial number or email, or you can call the 800 number, 800-552-4821, or email info@michiganallianceforfamilies.org to get connected with your regional parent mentor. We also have a very active Facebook page and Twitter account, and you are here on our YouTube channel. Please feel free to explore our other recorded webinars. Lots of great content here. Can answer a lot of questions. For more information on the present level of academic achievement and functional performance, please go ahead and pop over to our website, michiganallianceforfamilies.org, and you can type in PLAAFP into the search or present level into the search, or you can go in through IEP topics. We've tried to make it really easy to navigate there so you can find the answers to all your questions. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I appreciate it. Do not hesitate to reach out with your questions. Michigan Alliance for Families is an IDEA grant-funded initiative of the Michigan Department of Education, Office of Special Education, and Michigan's Federal Parent Training and Information Center, funded by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs. Have a great day.